Okay, go ahead.
My name is Carine. I'm the immediate past president of the Spanish Fork Salem Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you to our second annual South County Business Summit. Last year, we were able to meet in person at the school district offices and had a wonderful day. And of course, with COVID, we've had to change our plans, and we really appreciate you hopping on the virtual convention today. I'd like to thank not only the members of the Spanish Fork Salem Chamber, but also the Springville Mapleton Chamber and the Payson Santaquin Chamber for joining us today as well. I'd like to remind everyone to keep yourself muted while our speaker is presenting. If you have questions, please put them in the chat and I will help our speakers get your questions so that they can answer them. Each speaker will be able to decide if they want to do questions at the end or if they are okay to answer questions during their presentations. As Heather said, we're going to be giving prizes after each speaker. And then if you stay on for the whole day, the whole morning, there will be a grand cash prize at the end for listening to all three. And so I hope that you will do that. With that, I wanted to introduce our first speaker, amazing woman. You're going to absolutely love her, Carine Clark. She is a 3-time president and CEO of high growth tech companies, specializing in helping companies scale from 10 million to 100 million or more. Her reputation as a data-driven marketing executive at Novell, Alturas, and Symantec opened doors to lead Allegiance, Martez CX, and Banyan as president and CEO. She serves as executive on the executive board of GoEd, which you know is the Governor's Office of Economic Development and Silicon Slopes, a nonprofit helping Utah tech companies thrive. She has received numerous awards, and she earned her bachelor's degree in organizational communications and an MBA from BYU. Enjoys traveling, exploring, and doing hard things with her family. With that, I've heard her speak many times through the years, and you're just going to love her. So I'll turn the time over to Carine.
Carrie, thank you so much. And when Carrie asked me to speak, I love working with the chambers in the state. I love meeting so many people. So while this is a weird format, I'm going to try my best to make it a good use of your time. Hopefully you'll leave entertained. Hopefully it's not just that cash prize at the end of the day. Hopefully it'll get you to think about things a little differently. I'm going to share my screen and see if I can actually pull this off without, there we go. It means that I lose the chat function by sharing the screen. So let me see real quick.
No, there's the chat function. Is if people just go down to the bottom, there is a chat function that I can see.
Okay, so just let me know let me see if I pull the chat up. Oh, here we go. Okay. I got another window with chat. So awesome.
Yeah.
I'm happy to take questions during the presentation because this really is your time. So I'm happy to make it your time. So if you just want to pop in questions, I'll stop. Or if Carrie, if you want to stop me, I think that will probably be more fun for you guys. Just a couple things. Carrie mentioned that I serve on the GoEd board. So I'm actually the chair of the GoEd board. I think I'm being punished because I'm always pushing for the state to do more for our communities throughout the state. It can't just be that corridor of Lehigh and Salt Lake County. One of the things that we've been pushing on is I had a chance to meet with Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and Chris Peterson. One of those guys is going to be the governor, and talk to them about, look, what if we built some areas of focus? And one of those areas was South Utah County, that people like to live there, they like to work there. And so if we make it really easy for those businesses to get our support, to get our attention, and to help other companies move into communities that are like that, because it wasn't so long ago that Lehigh was part of rural Utah, if you think about it. So because of, I've noticed lately that this pandemic has messed up a lot of people, and I have an 18-year-old son who's not really thriving. So this subject is important to me. It's near and dear to my heart. We talk about what it means to be resilient, and I'm going to talk to you about what it means to be anti-fragile, which goes beyond being resilient. So we all are born with so much potential. We all come to this world with just open to the universe of possibilities, but things happen to us that changes us. And I see this with the pandemic, that some people are thriving, but most people are not thriving. And it's a shame, because if we really do think about it, we could use this as an opportunity to do some things differently. Too many times we limit ourselves. Too many times we struggle with finite thinking. And I see this all the time, because remember, I work with the legislature, I work with a lot of folks who've been doing it for a long time. Part of my job is I'm also the chair of the Silicon Slopes Commons, which is our public policy arm of Silicon Slopes. And finite thinking is when somebody already knows the answer to the question you haven't even asked, right? They think they know everything. And what happens when we do that is that it shuts down other thinking. It shuts down our ability to be diverse in thought. And so part of the things that we're trying to do is to help young people be open to the universe of possibilities, but also to help young people visit their future, help them see themselves in ways that maybe they hadn't thought of before. And it's the same with our teams, to help our teams and our colleagues be open to the universe of possibilities, because that's the only way we're going to grow. And that's why I love entrepreneurs. That's why I love working with the chambers, is because you're working with the clay that you have, and you're trying to continue to have your community grow, and you have your community just thrive in the way that makes sense for your community. So we're going to talk about resilience, and we're actually going to talk about what it means to be anti-fragile. So in my house, I have two sons. We always joke that we are SEAL Team Clark. We're going to adapt, we're going to improvise, and we're going to overcome. But too many times we fragilize people. We enable them to be weak. We think they can't do it. We think that they don't have the answers, or they don't know where to even find the answers. And especially with our young millennials. So most of my companies have been mostly millennials, and I call them the much maligned millennials. And I love millennials because they're not afraid to make mistakes. They're not afraid to ask questions. They're not afraid to push back. And some people see that as disrespectful, but I see that as part of them learning and adapting and improvising and overcoming. And so what if we thought about not only ways to bounce back, which is being resilient, but what if it was even better than being resilient? What if we understood the concept of anti-fragile? And so this comes from a lot of the philosophy of Nassim Nicholas Taleb, he was an options trader, a very successful one, but he's written quite a bit about this continuum of fragile, resilient, and then anti-fragile. And he said, there's not really a word for the opposite of fragile. So he created this concept of what it meant to be anti-fragile. So I'll give you some things to think about today that it might break your brain, but it might get you thinking about, okay, if I can adapt and improvise and overcome, what if my team, my family, my neighbors, my people could be anti-fragile? So let me give you some examples. So an easy one to understand is, when you're a corporate executive, you've worked your whole life, you're in a great spot, you feel really strong, but you're actually pretty fragile because your brand is very susceptible to damage. And so you don't try a lot of things. You try to really stay consistent with your brand. You don't think about a executive as being fragile, but that existence, especially in this call out social world we live in, you have to be pretty fragile. Early in my career, not fragile at all. I could do whatever I wanted. Nobody cared. Nobody knew who I was. Think about a cab driver, super resilient. They pick up a fare. If the fare goes poorly, they drop them off. They got another fare. Nobody cares, right? They're always bouncing back. And then someone who's anti-fragile is, think of a YouTuber who makes more money the more disruptive they are. And so they're controversial, and they get a lot of press, they get a lot of likes, they get a lot of attention. That's a pretty anti-fragile state. So let me give you another example from mythology. So most people don't know this guy, Damocles. He was a guy who was envious of the king, and he really wanted the king's job. So the king said, all right, you got my job. So he was sitting on the throne, but over his head hung a sword that could kill him, and it was hanging by a thread. That's a very fragile character. Anything could kill that guy. Now think of the phoenix. The phoenix dies and then it rises from the ashes and comes back over and over and over again. That's a very resilient character. It doesn't matter what happens to it, it always bounces back. But the anti-fragile character is the Hydra. So you cut off the head of the Hydra, two heads grow back. So the concept of anti-fragile means that you thrive from disruption and you thrive from pressure being put on the system. We actually have many systems today that are like this. So our immune systems do better when there was pressure put on them, especially as young people. That's why I worry about all this antibacterial stuff, because there will be a price at some point. Think about running. When you run, every day you can run farther and farther, and it tears down your muscles, but you become stronger. Or weightlifting. When you lift 100 pounds, the next time you lift, you can lift 105. You become stronger. There's a reason that we lift 100 pounds instead of 1 pound 100 times, because the only way to really get stronger is to just keep pushing ourselves. And then I use the example of intermittent fasting, which is like a fad right now. If you stop eating for periods of time, long periods of time, it gives your body a chance to reset its insulin levels. It gives your body a chance to thrive, really. And so that's why there's a lot of proponents and a lot of supporters of fasting, because it makes you stronger. It makes your body stronger. So too many times we're afraid of the hard things. We're afraid of, we've tried to protect people. We try to make it easier for people. We try to, what I call, pave the jungle for our teams. We pave the jungle for young people. We pave the jungle for ourselves, because it's just not any fun, right? It's like, I don't want to have it to be hard. Especially, I've done this and I have enabled my children to be weak, because early in my career, so I told you I have 2 sons, I would call my children no matter where I was on the planet, and I was always gone. So I'm a 3 million miler on Delta, not bragging, just saying as a point of evidence that I traveled the world with ease. And so part of me feeling like I'm a good mom is that I'm going to call my children no matter where I am on the planet, to get them up every day, to wake them up every day. And so felt really good about myself, felt really good about, okay, I'm working, but I'm a great mom. And I call them every day. And my excuse was, yeah, make sure they get up on time for school, make sure they get out the door, homework's in their bag, blah, blah, blah. But the message I was sending my children is that I don't think you can do it. I don't think that you're capable of getting your big self up. And what I was building was grown men who cannot get themselves out of bed every day, which I don't really want their wives to, be mad at me about that, because that's a terrible thing. Like, people should be able to get out of bed every day. And so I realized that I was enabling them to be weak. And it wasn't that I was a good mom, it's that I needed to trust them because they were capable. So when I called them and said, gentlemen, I'm not calling you anymore, you got to get yourselves out of bed, they're like, what? Like, what happened? Our universe is just like warped. And I thought back when I was growing up. So I grew up in Germany, and my father is the colonel, a brigade commander. So he's a combat guy. He's like a trained mass murderer. And there are 4 of us. And so my father, I remember him saying to us, the bus leaves at 0700. If you're not on the bus, you're walking to school. That was it. Like, that was our talk. And Do you know that not one time in all the time we lived there, not one of us missed the bus? And it never occurred to us that our bus ride was like 35 minutes. There's no way we could physically walk to the school. But the message he was saying to us was, your job is to get your big butts out the door to school. If you don't eat breakfast, that's on you. If you don't have your homework done, that's on you. And what he ended up creating were four children who were pretty tough, pretty self-contained, pretty independent, pretty capable. And all of us are overachievers, so there's that. But I miss that, right? I miss that I've been enabling my children to be weak. It's like I mentioned with antibacterials, when if you keep children out of any environment, then their immune systems struggle. There's a reason that it feels like there are more peanut allergies today than there were years ago. There was a study done in 2015 from the LEAP, it's called the LEAP study, that suggests that early and repeated consumption exposure of peanuts actually builds a protective immune response rather than an allergic response. And so what happened in the 80s and 90s is that unfortunately a poor child who had an actual peanut allergy freaked everybody out. And so we stopped letting peanuts be available in private schools, for example. So in my son's private schools, when they were growing up, you weren't allowed to have peanut butter sandwiches, you weren't allowed to have peanuts. And when I asked, how many kids in the school have peanut allergies, they're like, well, we don't know. So, and that's called naive intervention, when you think you're doing the right thing, but you're actually making things more fragile. You're actually making things not survive and not thrive. And if you think about, when we really do pave the jungle for our teams and for our colleagues, and we think we're being nice, we're doing the right thing, it could be that we're contributing to naive intervention. And if you think about young, like babies. So my oldest son, his wife's having a baby in March, and I'm, planning on being my grandma name's going to be Gigi, by the way, because I can't do the grandma thing. But I want to make sure that this child, I've got to be careful not to pay the jungle for this child. But if you think about how we learn language, we learn in the wild, right? We're just kind of thrown out there. And while we talk to the child and we read to the child and we play music, the child really does learn language. The way we're built is that we just learn language. We all can speak, right? Unless we have a hearing problem. So there is such a thing as prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. And I'm guilty of this, and that's why I spend time talking about it, is because I need to do a better job of making sure that I'm not paving the jungle for my young people. And now my granddaughter that's going to be born, I call her Miss Boo, by the way. My boys, I've worked really hard to make sure that they grow up to be resilient humans, calling them to wake them up aside. But when young people say to me, oh, it's not my fault, it was the circumstance, this is how this just happened to me. Part of helping them become anti-fragile and resilient is helping them understand that it's not the circumstances, it's really your response to things. So one of the demonstrations I typically do is I have a potato and an egg, and I say, okay, which one's fragile? So the egg, super fragile. You can't even carry it anywhere. Potato, not fragile. You throw both of them in a pot of boiling water, guess what happens? Came out, the potato is super mushy. You step on it, stand on it, but the egg has changed to where it's no longer fragile. That the composition of the egg has changed. So while both those went into the same circumstance, they came out differently. And so, I always say, are you a potato or are you an egg? Like, how are you going to come out of this? Because we do have the ability to survive more things than we actually understand, more than we know. We're tougher than we know, by the way. And we too many times follow the script of someone else instead of looking at it and saying, okay, what am I going to do and how am I going to survive and thrive in this? How am I not just going to be resilient, but be beyond that? For me personally, I am a cancer survivor. So I was diagnosed with a horrible cancer in 2012, ovarian cancer. And I had cancer of the appendix at the same time. And I'm like, why I got to be the best all the time? Why I got to be so extreme all the time? And when I said, what are my survival rate? What's the survival rate for these cancers? They're like, we're not going to tell you. I'm like, I have the internet in my hand, right? I can actually find it. They said, we're not going to tell you because it's terrible. It's a terrible number. So my survival rate was 20%. And which is, I don't win anything. So I did like, there's no chance I'm going to win this. But I thought about it. I mean, instantly it was like, okay, how am I going to be part of the 20% or the new 21? Like that's what the colonel taught us. And my doctor said, how come you're not sobbing uncontrollably in the corner? And I'm like, is that going to help me get better? And he's like, no. And I'm like, all right, so here's the deal. I'm going to do everything I can to be part of the 20% or the new 21. Now, it was not easy. It was probably one of the hardest things I've had to do because I did 18 months of chemotherapy. And the first 6 months, I did weekly chemotherapy. I did 3 drugs every week. And there were times when I thought, I may not survive this, but I really was focused on what was my script that I was going to be writing for myself. Not the script that everybody that when you find out you get cancer, you just kind of follow this pattern. No, I had to pave my own road. There was not a road paved for me through that jungle. And thankfully, I survived and it changed me. And that disruption that I had to deal with when I was at the top of my career, at the top of my game, probably refined me for the rest of my life. And I can say that because I did survive, I didn't die. I'm very sensitive to the people that are in the struggle and have had struggles. But that scar tissue, that experience changed me to where I'm a better everything. I'm a better person. I'm a better mom. I'm a better executive. I have a different lens on the planet. I already know I'm going to die because I've seen it. One of my in the hospital, I was in the hospital for 3 weeks at the beginning of the process, which is awful, I might add, but Huntsman cancer, hallowed ground for me. I made those lists, those lists of things that I'm not going to do anymore. And I decided I was going to do all my retirement trips with my children before they left my house. That I was going to make sure that this family would function beautifully without me, that the members of that everyone knew how I felt about them. And so I started operating differently. People don't understand it because I'll get a job offer. I'll be like, no, I'm good. And it's a great offer. And people are like, why don't you take that offer? It's a lot of money. It's this, it's that. You get a lot of notoriety. It's like, dude, I'm a cancer survivor. I'm not doing anything I don't want to do. And if it doesn't sound fun, not going to do it. If it doesn't help me achieve my goals, which is to make sure that my sons grow up believing that women are magical, then I'm not going to do it. And people don't understand that. Well, when you stare down what I stare down, it makes you different. And that not only makes you resilient, but it makes you anti-fragile. And for me, anti-fragile means that there's not much that can knock me out. There's not much that can take me out because I have a very simple filter. It's very binary. If I wake up and I'm still on the planet, I won another day. And so if I'm not on the planet, I'm a little bit bugged. So let's see, I got a question. It looks like let me read it out just really quickly. Carine, it feels like 2020 has been harder than ever before. Sometimes it feels like the hits just keep coming. And I've noticed that my employees have struggled in ways that never did before, mostly emotionally. If you saw this with one of your companies, what actions or steps might you take? Okay, so a lot of people ask me this, and it is a real struggle, not only for companies, but for families. So one of the things that you're going to have to make sure that you are telling your team and living is that we have to be able to have the language to communicate how we feel about things. It has to be safe. We have to be safe to fail and to struggle publicly. And that's something that as Americans, as people live in Utah, like we suck at this. Like, why isn't it okay to fail? Why isn't it respectable to fail? because that is my best lessons have been through every single failure and struggle that I've had. The other thing that we have to make sure and let people know is that you're going to have to come to grips with different. It's going to be different. And I don't go for better. I'm just like, look, it's going to be different. And so how can we very constructively think of ways to deal with different? And how can we stop worrying about some things? Because most things are who cares, doesn't matter, right? And when you check yourself, you're like, okay, I don't feel like I'm thriving. Okay, what do I got to do to thrive? Going to have to do things differently. So we're going to have to come to grips with the fact that things are different. Remember when I said that when I was diagnosed with cancer, that I wasn't going to follow a script? I'm worried that during this pandemic, a lot of people are following a script. They're kind of wallowing in, oh, what am I going to do? It's like, oh, I miss my team. I miss my tribe. Yes, all true. But what can you do to change that? What can you do to fix that? I try to push people back to basics. Are you getting outside? Are you getting in the sunshine? It was like 11 degrees the other day, super hard. Last night I hadn't been outside all day. I'm like, you know what? I'm gonna take the trash out, even though it's my son's job, because I just need to get outside. And then I noticed that there were a whole batch of new leaves, and I'm like, I'm just gonna rake these up and just kind of let my mind unwind. And it sounds like a ridiculous thing. And my husband's like, what are you doing out there raking? That is someone else's job. I'm like, you know what? I just need to be outside today. And my son came back late and he's like, Mom, like I know how to do this. I'm like, no, I'm not saying that you're weak. I just need to be outside. And he's like, thanks for doing that for me, right? So you can't follow a script. You've got to just help people to figure it out. Part of that is giving them the language of how does this feel, right? How do we embrace disruption? When this whole thing first started, I was in Dubai. I had a 3-week vacation because remember, I'm like, I do what I want. 3-week vacation Dubai, had paid for everything, was there with a dear friend of ours whose husband had passed away. And this was his trip that we had planned the year before. My doctor calls and says, you got to get back home. So after 48 hours in Dubai, I had to turn around and get everybody back. And while, you could be upset or blue about that, I said, guys, here's the deal. I'm going to get everybody back and we're going to get home and we're going to quarantine for 2 weeks. Not ideal, but guess what? We're blessed to be able to do this. And we'll come back to Dubai. We will come back here. We will find a way. But we're going to be back home. And then I started making lists of things that I had needed to get done for a long time. And I've been knocking those off. Projects that have been forever. So that doesn't work for everyone, but you've got to just keep pushing through this. We have to milk this uncertainty. We have to milk the randomness that's happening with us. We have to help our teams understand what it means to exploit these bad things that are happening. I see some companies that are thriving. I see some organizations that are doing great. I see some organizations that are closer than they ever were. In the world that I'm in now, we used to have to fly everywhere for meetings to show how important the client was. Well, guess what? I don't have to do that anymore. And I end up getting a lot more done. If you think about, this is something that I was pretty mindful of, is that if you think about like most of the medical miracles and the advances that we've had in our life, they've been through accidents. If you think about the polio vaccine, accidents. If you think about, so since I had to deal with this horrible cancer, I'm actually a student of cancer. Big fan of Huntsman Cancer. I know I mentioned that facility, but they do a great job and have created a culture of comfort and care up there. But there's a book called The Emperor of All Maladies. Of course, it's about cancer. There was a PBS series about it. And one of the early researchers was this guy named Sidney Farber, who was a pathologist. And he worked in the basement of this hospital. And all he did was deal with dead bodies all the time. And when they were young people who were diagnosed with leukemia who weren't surviving, he would have these young children, these bodies, and it was just too much. And he came up with chemotherapy using the blood as a delivery system, because leukemia is cancer of the blood. And how do you make sure and get the right meds to the right part of the blood? And so that, I benefited from his research, but he came from a really horrible situation, and that that sparked that research. There are a lot of stories like that. So culturally, we don't do this. We don't kick each other in the butt. We try to make it really easy for each other. We don't embrace disruption. But imagine if you ran through disruption. It really is the shortest way. What if you felt bad, but then, okay, you picked yourself up and just kept going? Because the people and the organizations that do that are the ones that thrive. They're the ones that are wildly successful. They're the ones that understand that the universe really is, that they really are open to the universe of possibilities. And I've seen during this pandemic, it's amazing. I've seen so many, between the Black Lives Matter and the different protests and different diversity challenges, and people are so angry. And I worry that our shout out culture from behind our phone is making it so that we really don't have a voice. And I mentioned at the very beginning about an executive being vulnerable because they've achieved so much. Well, we see it with Twitter, with Instagram, with that some voices that might be in the minority end up driving and changing the conversation and the complexion of what's actually going on. And I'm worried about that because it's like this massive group think without some people really thinking. So there's two powers that I talk about and that I feel strongly about. The first one is the power of humanity, and that the strength of the individual, and then the power of us as a collective, and we see each other as humans, not as tweets and not as political positions, but that we really understand that we are people that make mistakes, and that it's okay, and that if we can be generous and kind, that we really can relieve suffering in the world, that we really can lift as we rise in our personal life and our career, that we really are powerful beings who can stare down a horrible cancer diagnosis or a horrible thing that happens to you. I promise you, everybody I meet has something terrible that they're wrestling with or struggling with or have struggled with, and that they have some loss and they have some challenge that you wouldn't trade. And so if we look at people and can have respect for people, it changes a lot of this political stuff. That's not my favorite, by the way. Like, I'm a patriot. Remember, I told you my father is a combat heavy brigade commander. And I believe in this great nation, and I believe that we can build a more perfect union. And so I can't wait for this election to be over, because not only do I care about the power of humanity, but the power of charity, that it costs nothing to be kind. And that instead of this call out culture where we just expose people and problems, what about going to the person privately and just saying, hey, this is how I feel, or this is what I think? It's a much braver, tougher to go and have a private conversation than to just throw it out there. Our minds we're built for tribalism. Part of this pandemic challenge is that I don't have my tribe that I used to have all the time. But I actually do have my tribe. It's just in a different manifestation. And the problem with tribalism is that it's a power to bind people, but it's also a power to blind people. And while we have our tribes, in high school it was a clique, we have people that look like us that are close to us, that's our tribe, but it blinds us to other people that are isolated or that are different, feel different, and we call out those differences and people don't trust us. So if you can build trust in your organization, if you can help your organization have diversity of thought, I think that I value diversity. I put my children in private school, not because I'm a snob, but because in my community, all white, blonde kids, and I needed my children to grow up in a community that was more like I grew up in. So in their classes, they had Indian, Japanese, Korean, there was some Finnish kids in there. My kids they weren't part of a group that was the majority. They were just part of this interesting collective. My children are well traveled. My children have been everywhere on the planet because remember, we got all our retirement trips done. And so they've been polished by diversity. They've been polished by the opportunity that they have. Not everyone has that opportunity. I understand that. But we have to find ways to open up our minds and to be able to have tough conversations. And that, in truth, part of what the chambers do and part of what we need to do is to build a bigger circle. And so that our circle is really open, and that we stop problems when they're small, and that we do look for ways to lift each other. I feel strongly about making sure that all the communities in our state have the same access that people have on that I-15 corridor in Salt Lake County and North Utah County. That I heard on the radio today that 1 in 8 children in our state goes hungry. And I was like, how do we have this? We're a rich state. We have smart people. We shouldn't have anybody at the poverty level. And if I can make sure that the chambers have the resources that they need to continue to build vibrant, growing communities, then because I know I'm going to die, when I die, people will say, you know what, she was funny, and you know, she tried really hard, and maybe we were a little bit different. So think about what that means. Think about how you can build a bigger circle. Think about how you can help your teams move through the challenges of disruption. And think about how you can become anti-fragile, and how you can still be human, still feel things, still, you know, still have those hard days, but come out of it much better, much stronger, and much more willing to help everyone. So thank you for listening to me today. I hope that I was able to achieve the things that I framed up at the beginning. Are there any other questions before they throw me out?
Yeah, any questions? Feel free to either put them in the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and raise your hand, I'm sure that would be fine as well. Looks like we had Angie said that was amazing. No.
Well, I'm blessed. I'm a pretty blessed human, and I'm happy to be here.
Carine, Wendy wants to know if you have a list of recommended books that that you think would be helpful on the discovering anti-fragile.
So I'm a voracious reader. Part of the problem is because I don't sleep very much, and I think that's from my cancer. Since I know I'm going to die, it's like, oh, well, how can I waste any time sleeping? So I sleep about 4 hours a night. I read a ton of books. So the author that that I referenced, his name is Nassim Nicholas Taleb. His books are pretty heady. I mean, they're pretty research heavy, so they're not like a lot of fun to drag through. Start with his TED Talk. So if you Google his name, Taleb, T-A-L-E-B is his last name, and there's a couple of TED Talks about anti-fragility. He's an options trader. So, and he sometimes when he talks about things, you're like, I'm so lost in the data. Don't get lost. Just carry the concepts with you. I'm a big fan of a book called Curious. So I don't read any books twice, and I read that book twice because it talks about that curiosity is a state, not a trait. And I think too many times we think that that it's something we were when we were children, and then we just lost it. No. The power of curiosity really is being open to the universe of possibilities. And there's a great section on working with young people and how to foster that curiosity. If you have young people in your life, and you should, everyone should have like 20 kids that you're mentoring. It's not hard with tech, but how to ask questions and how to be really curious yourself. I get in trouble for being too curious, and I take it as a compliment now. There's really a lot out there. If you and people don't understand the concept of being anti-fragile, but if you just let it roll around your brain, you'd be like, okay, this is actually a great way to be.
Wonderful. We've had a few more people who have said thank you for your personal stories, for being vulnerable. Hashtag women are magical. Bruce says this idea of anti-fragility seems to be the opposite of the snowflake and woke culture being encouraged and tolerated. How do you think about that? Or what do you think?
So I've been pretty vocal about super woke cultures, and the problem with the super woke teams is that we're enabling people to be weak. We should be able to have conversations, but if you want me to sign a document that says I'm a racist, I'm not going to do it. I went to an all black inner city middle school. Are there things that I need that have blind spots? Absolutely. And please, let's have a conversation. Like, I want people to be very vocal about if I do or say something that goes against their culture or their belief. We need to be having these conversations. I I told you my father, combat heavy brigade commander. My father was an orphan at 3. He failed the 2nd grade. This man had no hope of being any success at all. Came from a really tough family, lots of problems. And yet somehow he navigated all this, married, 4 children, all college graduates, all the things that you want for your kids, all contributing to society. And he's still that broke little 3-year-old whose father died, but he taught us what it meant to be great people, people of tremendous integrity, people who are not afraid to stand up and to listen, but also to build a bigger circle. So I could keep going on and on. We could do that another time, but we got to have conversations together and stop putting people in boxes and building a bigger circle.
Oh, I think we agree. There's a question about those 2 doors behind you. Curious. They're curious about those 2 doors behind you.
So I have my house is I bought a house years ago that's massive, and not because I wanted to, but because I really like it's on 1 acre land. I don't care about the house, but this is the most quiet place in the whole house, and part of my office has these 2 doors. So you get to decide every day what door you're going to go through.
I love that. All right. Well, it looks like, it's been a great morning, a great kickoff to our business summit. And I appreciate you being willing to speak to us and your words of wisdom and your experiences with your cancer and with business and everything else. I think that this disruption that we've had and the ability to be resilient is really something that our business community needed to hear, especially as we come into the winter and we don't know how long it's going to last. And so it's a
Well,
good
thank
thought
you.
process.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing what you guys do and you building where you stand and growing where you stand. I'm a big fan of that. So appreciate being invited and I hope everyone had a good time this morning. So thank you guys.
Yes. Yes. Um, oh, that looks like we have one more question. Let me just double check there. It says the problem with issues of inequality and how to solve them is that everyone honestly has their biases and fragility issues. Yet the answer has been broad and sweeping characterizations based on demographics. We have lost the individual in the conversation. What is your response to that?
And that's part of the concept of tribalism, right? That it's easy to operate as a tribe and not the individual. And so I try to encourage people, ask a lot of questions, have a lot of questions, spend as much time as needed. But Utah, for example, we are not a diverse culture. We are not, even though we speak 140 languages in this state. I was on a call yesterday. I'm not going to tell you which one. I took a picture of my screen, my Zoom, because all the little windows were all white men in their 60s. And I was like, it would be easy to feel isolated, right? But I'm going to not let that happen because I'm going to make sure that my voice is heard. But I'm also going to understand that I can learn things from their experience. But it's, to say, all right, we're going to have half of that picture should be people of color. Yeah, it should, but it's not. So, and the pipeline is not huge right now. So how can I go and start braiding in folks that don't speak up, that may not feel like they belong in that group? It will take all of us and it will take some time, right? I told you I went to an all black inner city middle school in Norfolk, Virginia. I was the only white girl and I was 11. And my dad's like, you're just going to have to make your own spot there, right? So I didn't get to go to private school like my siblings. I went to this school and it was terrifying, but it formed part of me that, like, look, what can I learn from other people, right? Part of that, building that bigger circle. It's not going to be solved overnight and it's not going to be solved, I don't think, for a long time. But if our young millennials can help figure this out because they're open to the universe of possibilities.
Good thought. Um, All right, with that then, for those of you who may have come on late and might not have heard, we are having a prize drawing for after each speaker. And so Heather